Hello and welcome back, Eddie Brodasevich. George Stoya here from the SoonerScoop.com studios, and we go down south and bring in Mr. Josh McCuistion back for another recruiting report. A lot to get into today, obviously. A couple big announcements coming up for Oklahoma's 2025 or possibly for Oklahoma's 2025 class. We'll get into plenty of that. Good time to be, first off, hello, Josh. How's it going? Everything going well down in the Houston HQ?
Guys, the third wheel returns. This is really exciting. Been watching all the stuff, from the sunny beaches of Jamaica to Colorado. I mean, it's been a tough life. I very much feel where George was a couple months ago, getting back into the swing of it now. But yeah, guys, just I am excited to be back.
We were hoping you would join the late night Saturday night practice report, Josh.
Extravaganza
I think
party.
I think we sent you a Zoom link. You never hopped on.
I stayed up to watch it, guys, because that's your space. I don't want to step on toes. I don't want to get in the way. It would be much like me trying to now get on the Porter Moser bandwagon when he is just signing everybody. So got to know my role. Got to stay in my lane.
Well, with the phrase stolen valor all over, YouTube and the algorithm right now, we don't want to get you into any type of stolen valor like some. You know what I mean? All right, let's get into it, though. Did you have any follow-up on that, George Stoya?
Nope, zero follow-up.
You're always pretty talkative about that stuff in the office, in the lobby, but when we come here, you're not. Interesting, isn't it? Let's get into it, though. Obviously, Oklahoma's offensive line class, I think it has been almost a repeatable type thing every time that we come here for the recruiting report, just in terms of everything that's going on with Bill Bedenbaugh's group. Off to a good start, obviously, in that 2025 class, but at the same time, the big ones are coming up here over the next couple weeks. Andrew Babalola, as well as Michael Fasusi, who a lot of Oklahoma fans, have certainly turned their attention to. Let's start with Fusi, Josh, just in terms of everything that is developing and everything that is out there now, just under about 10 days from his announcement and commitment to wherever that may be.
Yeah, guys. I mean, we're on the the penultimate recruiting report where we might talk about Michael Fasusi as a undecided player. Couple of these down the road, we're going to know, and that's something I don't know about you guys, but I'm absolutely ready for, because we've over the last month, really since the time he left his final official visit at Texas on the June 21st, it's just kind of been like a waiting game, and kind of we've been waiting until about this point in time. Like, this is when we knew everybody was going to start jockeying for position. Everybody was going to start making some moves, and I think that's what you're starting to see. I've been talking for a while that I really liked everything I was hearing. I like where Oklahoma's at. I think if he decided right now, I still think it's Oklahoma. I know that's kind of been my stance for a while. I've not heard anything to change that, though I will say I like that some others are starting to hear the same. Steve Wiltfong mentioned in a report this morning on On3 that, there's a lot of buzz around OU that he's kind of starting to hear and those kind of things. So you like when it's not just it's nicer when it is an echo chamber a little, in a manner of speaking. But what I will say is I'm starting to hear the NIL stuff starting to, people are kind of making that final, how much can we get in the pot? How much can we do to get Michael Fasusi over the finish line? So I think we're going to watch that race run out here a little bit over the next week or so. I spoke to Mike a little bit the other day, just kind of making preparations for his announcement on August 21st, for those that don't know. And I still like where Oklahoma is, but we know where these curveballs come from, guys. So to me, that's the last hurdle for Oklahoma to clear. When I talk to Texas sources, they kind of think it's Oklahoma. Just when you talk to various people, Oklahoma seems to be where the arrow is pointing, but we've seen this. And so we're just going to have to watch it play out. I don't want to get too out over my skis or say anything crazy, but I think Oklahoma fans have reason for hope.
Josh, you mentioned NIL. How big of a factor is that in this recruitment? Is that something that is a top priority for Michael Fasusi? I know there's been several other guys that wasn't the top priority. Other guys, maybe it is. Where is that in his priority list?
One of my favorite things about Mike is he's been open about it. He's answered questions with me. A lot of guys kind of, they kind of hem and haw and act like, that's taboo. And he's been pretty open, like that is a meaningful thing to him. Like, the opportunity to help his family out, to do some things that can set up, set up the family for the years going forward. And I think Michael sees it. A lot of people say, oh, it's just a money grab. I think Mike sees it as, if something happens, this could be, something that's kind of changes the future for my family. So he really is thoughtful about it. Do I think that the highest number wins? No, I don't think Michael sees it like that. So I think there is more to play here. He's talked a lot about the environment at Oklahoma, with Bill Bedenbaugh, Brent Venables. I think they play really well together, where Mike's got a very business side to him that I think Bill really fits with his NFL background and all the things that we know about Bill Bedenbaugh, an offensive lineman. I think that really calls to Michael Fasusi. At the same time, Brent being the engaging personality that he is, I think that works. So there's a lot that makes sense here. Again, I think this is OU Texas. I think that's really who this is going to come down to. I can't rule out A&M, but I really think it's going to be OU or Texas here in this kind of final week. And it may go back and forth a little bit. We may see, some yo-yoing of this situation. But from what I've gathered, as we go into the week, Oklahoma is where you'd want to be.
Josh, two quick more questions. Sorry, Eddie.
No, you're fine.
Is this a recruitment that after this commitment, no matter which way it goes, that it continues? We talk about that a lot on here. Is this something that it's going to go all the way to signing day, even with a commitment? And then number two, let's say OU misses out on Michael Fasusi. Do they shift their attention elsewhere, or do they just live with their offensive line class that they've got?
Well, I think it would pretty much be done. I don't see that becoming a situation where Michael's going to let the chaos kind of get involved in his recruitment. I don't think his family wants that. I don't think he wants that. I think it's, they've spent enough time on this. Obviously, he's running out one of the longer recruitments when you look at look at Oklahoma's class. There's 22 guys on board, and they're still waiting on basically 3 and, for probably 2 spots. So that's kind of embodied by how this is all gone. How recruiting goes now. He's waited a long time. He's got the information he needs, and I think he just wants to make a decision and be done. And we actually had it in Scoop last Friday. He has told people a decision has been made. Now, does that mean it can't change between now and signing day? Is that a smokescreen? Or between now and his announcement on August 21st? I don't know. But I can tell you he has told people a decision has been made. So that's interesting to kind of read into and see what you will, when all the Texas, sites and sources kind of don't feel great about the situation. I think that may be indicative of something. As far as what OU does, if it's not Oklahoma for Michael Fasusi, I think the first move they probably make is to pivot back maybe to Lamont Rogers, maybe go back in that direction, see what he thinks. We know he's a guy that had a lot of interest in Oklahoma. We really felt like it was going to be Oklahoma. My impression was that maybe there was just a little bit more, people say NIL, and I'd certainly think NIL was a factor there. But do I know that Missouri made some monstrous bid beyond Oklahoma? No, that's not really my impression. But I do wonder if Oklahoma would kind of circle back, really put the focus on him, where with Lamont, OU was still juggling Babalola, still juggling Fasusi, and even Ty Haywood at that point in time. So there was a lot that was going on, to where now you could spend the next 3-4 months just saying, Lamont, you're our guy. We need you in this class, and kind of move forward like that and see if maybe that moves the needle a little bit. Because I know he likes Oklahoma a lot. There's a lot of connection, from the coaching staff at Horn to the people that he's kind of grown up around at Horn to Oklahoma. It's one of the programs in Dallas where OU really does have some boots on the ground that are helpful to them, that will bring him up to a game if he wants to go to a game, that kind of stuff. So that would be my instant reaction, where if it's not Michael Fasusi, maybe they pivot back and, kind of revisit Lamont Rogers again.
If Oklahoma was able to land Michael Fasusi coming up on October 21st, you start looking at an offensive line class of Fasusi, obviously, Ryan Foje, Darius Afalava, Owen Hollenbeck. What kind of job would we talk about Bill Bedenbaugh if he is able? Then maybe we're getting over the bridge before it already happens. But what kind of group would you call that in terms of could it be comparable to what Todd Bates and Miguel Chavis did a year ago when we talked so much about the importance of bringing in a 2024 defensive line class? Would that have been flipped over now to 2025 with the offensive line? And again, projecting a lot here, but if it were to hold and, what happens, what we think as of today could happen, and Michael Fasusi commits to Oklahoma, that's a fantastic class, is it not?
Guys, it's an unbelievable class. And I'm sitting here looking through it, and I wanted to make sure before I say this I'm right. As you guys know, I've been working on a bunch of I've been spreadsheeting like crazy over the last few weeks, kind of trying to get some stuff ready. I think if you were to land Foje and Fasusi, guys, I'm kind of on board with Ryan Foje is going to end up a 5-star. Like, I kind of think that's going to happen. Whether it's network or, kind of whether it's a universal thing or just on 3, I think he's really special. And I think people are starting to figure it out. And if you were to get two 5-star offensive tackles, I can flat out say that's never been done in the modern era of Oklahoma football recruiting. It's never once happened. In fact, only 2 5-stars that I can recall OU has signed at the position. That's Stephen Good in 2008 and Bray Walker 10 years later in 2018. So obviously you hope these situations go a little better. Stephen with his injuries and Bray, it just never kind of came together. So you want this to be better than that. But when you're signing these kind of guys, this is what we talk about in recruiting all the time. You can keep hoping that you're smarter than everybody and you can develop everybody at a higher clip than your opponents. But when you're landing the guys that everybody wants, that's a much safer route to success. And with that being said, with Fasusi and Foje, you add that to a young guy like Logan Howland, all of a sudden that offensive tackle room starts to get pretty talented pretty fast. And I would think you would have a lot of competition at a position where, Oklahoma's, maybe it kind of works out perfectly, guys, when you look at this situation with, Jake Taylor at right tackle right now, Michael Tarquin, at left tackle, or Jake Sexton, however you want to look at that. We were talking about that a little before the show, but there is going to be playing time available in the near future, and you can let those guys grow into that role. And then you've got the kind of offensive line that, everybody's told you got to have that in the SEC. That's where that's born. And then you add in a mauler like Owen Hollenbeck at center, who's just an absolute unit. And then Darius Afalava, I think, is one of the more underrated offensive linemen in the country. I like him a lot.
Just in terms of the other 5-star that is out there right now, Steve Wiltfong, our coworker at On 3, put it out there this morning, just kind of looking at all the 5-star guys that are set to make announcements. Andrew Babalola's name is involved in that group. Oklahoma's still recruiting him. But I think this is something that has been maybe trending in the other direction, and you've alluded to this, Josh. If it's not going to be Stanford, where there were a lot of RPMs, the Michigan effect, if you will, kind of seems like a happy medium between the academics also having a really good football program. Kind of seems like that's the situation, even though Oklahoma is still involved with Andrew Babalola, the 5-star out of Blue Valley Northwest High School up in Overland Park, Kansas.
Yeah, guys, what I'm enjoying a little moment here where I'm starting to read this stuff where it sounds a lot like what we've been talking on the recruiting report for a couple of weeks now, where we had said, hey, I know everybody's talking Stanford on Babalola, but watch out for Michigan. And now it seems like that's starting to become like everybody's like, okay, I think if it's going to be somebody, it's going to be Michigan. That's still where my bet is. That's still what I think is going to happen. I know a lot of people are talking about Auburn with him as well. Talking to some sources, it's kind of like when all the Stanford stuff went crazy. I talked to some people that are very familiar with him, and it was just like, I don't think he's going to go to Stanford. Like maybe he'll surprise everybody, but there were people around him that just didn't buy that. And now when I hear like, oh, it's Auburn, and we know Auburn and the NIL game and all that Hugh Freeze is willing to do, I don't think he's that kind of kid either. Like, I don't think that's what he's out there looking for. So I don't think that's as big a part of this as some are wanting to make it out to be. So again, I think it's the middle ground. I think it's probably going to be Michigan. Oklahoma's certainly not out of it. I know he remains in communication with them. They're still, they believe they're right there in the thick. I would probably, if I was going to handicap it, I would say, you're looking at probably Michigan on top. I think some form of Oklahoma and Stanford behind, and then probably Auburn and Missouri would be how I kind of expect that to play out, just based on what his parameters are. I think Michigan best fits the general idea of kind of what I think Andrew Babalola was looking for.
You mentioned Oklahoma maybe possibly waiting on 3 guys for possibly 2 spots, and if one of those is going to be offensive line, I guess the other would it be Christian Jones, another name that Oklahoma could possibly be waiting on, the 6'2 and a half, 15-pound linebacker out of Omaha, Nebraska. Continued good news for Brent Venables and Zach Alley on that front.
Yeah, I still, again, and this is another thing where, Steve Wiltfong had a report, mentioned that he put up on the Crimson Corner, actually, that he would pick Oklahoma at this point if he had to. And at the same time, I don't think anybody's sold. Like, I don't think anybody's like, oh, it's definitely OU for Christian Jones. The part that I think is scary for Oklahoma fans is this all feels real familiar. Like, we watched Grant Brix last year, where it looked like Oklahoma had finally done whatever they needed to do to convince him to come all the way south to Oklahoma, to, let go of Nebraska. Next thing we know, Matt Rule drops a giant diesel truck on his high school front yard, and everything just changed. It's kind of the same deal with Cade Pietchak. We've talked about him, where it looked like he was going to pick Oklahoma. I even had a forecast in, and then it ends up being Nebraska. So, I forecast, prediction, whatever. Now with Christian Jones, it's felt like Oklahoma, really since his official visit, he was a party at the Palace guy in late June. And there's this thing that's like, it's a weird timeline that he's chosen. He's chosen like 3 weeks into the season is kind of what he's thinking for his timeline. Well, why would you pick that? It feels very much like, Nebraska, give me a reason to believe. Like, show me on the football field, this is going to be better, this is going to get fixed. And then maybe he picks Nebraska. But at the same time, talking to Nebraska sources, it's always been very the flip conversation with them. It seemed to a lot of people around that program that it's always been kind of he's looking for a reason not to go to Nebraska. Like, he wants somebody to sell him and convince him. And I know On3 is not huge on his ranking. I know that's upset a lot of OU fans, but I like this kid. Like, I think he's good. He's long. He's athletic. I see some stuff here that I really like, and I think it would be a huge win. You put him and Marcus James together, and that linebacker room is more athletic for their addition, in my opinion.
Isn't it kind of one of those things, though, too, that if Brent Venables thinks you can play linebacker at Oklahoma, or even to that extent, Zach Alley thinks you can play linebacker for Brent Venables and himself, it's okay. The evaluation, like, that's a scot-free evaluation. If they sign off, kind of like we talk about with offensive linemen and the Michigans and Iowas of the world, like, if those guys are getting recruited to play that position at that school, you just kind of sign it off and go, no further questions, Your Honor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are certain places where you're just like, those guys know what they're looking at. You mentioned offensive lineman. Mario Cristobal says you can play offensive line. You can probably play offensive line. Same with Bill Bedenbaugh. Same with the guys at Michigan. I mean, like, there's no question. I mean, it's not always about the ranking. And again, I've watched Eddie, Brent Venables evaluate linebackers. I've gotten to see him do it up close at camps, when he was defensive coordinator, and talking to these guys. And, when we could really sit there and just in the middle of a drill and kind of listen to him talk to guys, he's got a lot of stuff he's looking for. He knows exactly what he's looking for. And, he's got good guys around him, and Curtis Lofton and Rufus Alexander, Zach Alley, James Skalski. So there's a lot of people that know what his mind is as a linebacker. So if they're all signed off on these guys, I think you have to put a lot of faith in that.
Josh, what do you make of the job Zach Alley has done on the recruiting trail so far? I mean, we haven't heard a whole lot about him. I mean, Marcus James was somebody they were recruiting before he, ever got on campus. Christian Jones is obviously a guy that he's interested in. But, I mean, what have you made of, I guess, that linebacker group so far and the job that Alley's done?
It's interesting because it's tough to gauge in that it was never going to be a big linebacker class. We've saw, a couple years ago where you had the big group of Lewis Carter and Samuel Omasigo and that whole group. And the year before that was Kanik and Kip Lewis and Kobe McKenzie. So you had a couple of really big groups of linebackers. And I can't lie, there was a point in time where I was like, now that Brent's running the show, he's just going to recruit 3 linebackers a year. Like, it's just going to be, 15 linebackers on the roster, and, whatever happens. But they've played the numbers game a little tighter since then. And in a perfect world, would they maybe take 3 if they really got the right guys? Yeah, maybe. Like, I could buy that argument. But with this group, I think 2 was probably always the most realistic outcome. And so it's tough to gauge because they were in on some guys kind of from the Southeast that Oklahoma seemed like they liked. I mean, guys that, Allie offered pretty quickly after his arrival. But then I would talk to those guys, and it was just kind of like either, they were always going to go to Georgia, or they were always going to Florida State, or, whatever the outcome was. I don't know that I could say that really reflects on Zach Allie, because all of them were like, oh, yeah, we love Zach Allie. We love the relationship we have with him. But it's very different when you're talking to a guy at Jacksonville State who is like, I mean, for a 5-star guy, talking to a guy at Jacksonville State's like talking to, a really sweet, I don't know, like a girl that you're never going to date. Like, it's never going to happen. That's never going to come to pass. And then all of a sudden they're at Oklahoma, and you're like, I got to take them seriously, but I'm too far down the road with this, with this other thing. So I think that is kind of what ends up happening here. Is it's just this first year, he's having to redefine his relationship. I really think we can start to gauge it. Yeah, and Eddie, I've said this forever. The first class, I don't gauge anybody by that. It's really, really hard, especially in this era when guys are being offered and recruited as like 8th graders and 9th graders. There's no way to have that relationship yet.
I think too, it's important to say, if Danny Stutzman and Kip Lewis and, even a Kobe McKenzie, Lewis Carter go out and have great seasons this year, like we expect, then he's able to go on the recruiting trail next offseason and be like, look at what I did in
Sure.
1 year at Oklahoma. And not to say that he has, I think Brent obviously can do that too with the development of somebody like a Danny Stutzman. But I think those guys obviously have now become his guys. And if Kip Lewis goes out and just has makes a huge leap this year, or Kobe McKenzie, who it sounds like he's having a great fall camp and is going to play a lot. Like, I think Zach Allie, that'll help him a lot on the recruiting trail. And not to say that he's done a poor job. I think, like Josh said, it's just a different circumstance.
Danny has to cut the Butkus trophy in half and give half of it to Zach Allie, is what
Yes.
you're saying.
Yeah,
that
basically.
sounds about right. Absolutely. Just for further.
And George is right, and I know people, like, there's somebody out there like yelling at their screen saying, "What about Brent Venables? He's coached Butkus winners, blah blah blah." Schools will use that against Oklahoma and say, "Well, okay, great, Brent Venables is there, cool." But their linebacker coach hasn't coached anybody like that, and he's the one you're going to be working with day after day. But once you've got an All-American like Danny Stutzman, regardless, and I mean, I'm saying this to be fully transparent, regardless of how much time and how much development Danny Stutzman had under Zach Allie gets to say he was his coach in his All-American senior year, and that trumps almost anything else that anybody can say. I mean, it does, because these kids, it's what they can see. What can you prove to me? And I think that's, again, that will help him tremendously. So Danny, to help Zach Allie, all he's got to go do is just be Danny. Just go be the player that you are, and OU will be better for it recruiting going next year.
It's kind of crazy to start thinking about 2027 in terms of recruiting. But at the same time, it was somebody that had visited here for the second time to Norman, the Sooner Under the Stars in 2027 quarterback offer, Trey Taylor out of Illinois, actually. It continues to sound like there's a developing relationship there with Oklahoma. Any more to kind of catch up on, since the post exit from the Sooner Under the Stars?
Yeah, guys, sometimes I write stories. I don't know if it's this way for you all. Like, I'll do an interview or I'll have a conversation. I write it out and I'm like, people are going to be excited about this. This is going to be a big deal. And I was a little surprised, again, while drinking on a beach. So, hey, gauge that however you want to. Look down on me if you want. But the Trey Taylor news, where he talked about Oklahoma in his top 3, and he just gushed about his time that he and his mother spent with the coaching staff and how much he really liked Seth Littrell, it kind of just flew over. Like, nobody really talked about it. And I don't know, maybe it was out of spite for me, which I certainly understand. That's okay. But this is one of the premier quarterbacks in the country. Got huge offers, Michigan, Ohio State, you name it. A bunch of big-time programs are involved here. And he flat out told me Oklahoma's in his top 3. Now, he and I kind of discussed off the record who were the other 3, and I'm going to honor his kind of silence that he asked for. But I like where Oklahoma is. Like, I think they have a real chance here. And for that to kind of go overlooked just kind of surprised me. Now, the thing that's great for OU is they're also in very good shape with Peyton Houston, the quarterback from Shreveport Evangel. I'm hoping to see both this year. That's my current plan. As I start to work on my season plans for getting around and seeing as many OU prospects as I can. And my hope is almost to see them like back-to-back weeks so I can really kind of have it fresh and compare those two. But Trey Taylor's a guy that you watch. And again, like you said, Eddie, it's crazy to think about this, but when you watch his tape right now, you're watching a freshman in high school, and he is slinging it. I mean, that guy, it's limited tape. It's not a lot. Like Peyton Houston played more as a freshman than Trey Taylor did, but you can see why Seth Littrell and everybody wasted no time. And, for those that, again, I kind of have to keep saying it because Peyton's kind of become the guy that everybody knows. He's a little more regional, but Trey Taylor was the first offer they made at the position. That's not nothing.
Josh, when Seth Littrell was hired as OU's new offensive coordinator, I think there's a lot of question marks about can he recruit quarterbacks? He's never really coached the quarterback position. It sounds like he's done a pretty damn good job recruiting that position. Obviously, he's been able to hold on to a guy like Kevin Sperry, but also go out, get Jaden O'Neal, and it sounds like they're in on a couple of the top quarterbacks in this class. What's been the feedback on Seth Littrell and the job that he's done recruiting quarterbacks specifically?
Yeah, guys, I mean, and I'll admit, there's times when like OU fans will ask questions. I'm like, that's crazy. What are you guys talking about? Like, this is going to be fine. And then there's sometimes where I'm like, yeah, okay. Like, I didn't know what Seth Littrell as a quarterback recruiter at the level of Oklahoma was going to look like. Because, you go back to his time at North Carolina, they had good players, but there was never, they weren't recruiting the Jackson Arnolds, these elite guys. That wasn't happening. But in talking to people who were around him at North Texas and really go back knowing him, 15, 20 years, obviously Seth's got a lot of connections all around the state of Oklahoma. And it's just like, he's just cool, man. He can be who he needs to be. He's going to impress, whoever. And so you look at a guy where, his first, Kevin Sperry was already committed. He's kept him on board. That's great. His first commitment that he is responsible for is a kid from Southern California. We talked about that when Jaden O'Neal committed. Like, you can't think of an area that would seem more opposite to who Seth Littrell is and what we understand of him. And now the two guys he's recruiting in the next class, one's from Shreveport, Louisiana, and the other one's from, the suburbs of Chicago. Like, it's crazy how diverse he shows himself to be and how many different kind of guys he can recruit. And again, Seth Littrell's just kind of cool, man. Like, I don't know of another way to say it. And it seems like people really respond to him just kind of like, it's not high pressure. He's not going to be that kind of recruiter. He just gets to know these guys, their families. And I think they respect not only, like I said, that he is so relaxed, but at the same time, he's direct. I mean, we know Seth Littrell's not going to feed you a line. He's going to tell you what the real deal is.
I know that Jake Roberts talked about Seth Littrell a little bit on Saturday evening when we talked to some of the players. And, obviously there's a long way to go in that recruitment. I know that you're writing a story on Seth Littrell here coming up, which is going to be exciting. Josh, you wrote about Zane Rowe today. It's a great time to join SoonerScoop.com just in terms of the overall website. And if you want to do that, there is a special offer right now for you all out there, the YouTube viewer here with, 2 months, $1. Pretty simple. Promo code OU1 if you're so interested. Obviously, a lot going on as high school football ramps up. I know that they began today here in the state of Oklahoma with practice, and then obviously we're going to be getting out to some practices and scrimmages. And Tuesday. All of a sudden, you're going to look up and you're going to be looking at the start of high school football season as George tries to interject himself.
I thought you were talking about OU practice.
It was real nasty the way that you did that too.
I thought you were talking about OU practice, which we get to go out to on Tuesday.
We are going out to OU practice
Hear
on
from Brent
Tuesday.
Venables.
We'll be talking to Brent Venables as we kind of slowly make this transition. Josh, there's obviously a lot going on in the recruiting world. Not so much just in terms of that 2025 class, because we talked about it here at the top with Michael Fasusi, but been a couple weeks since Oklahoma has opened up camp now, preseason camp, and I know that you've been keeping up with it. Anything stuck out to you just in terms of, oh, okay, maybe that's a little bit of a surprise and something that I didn't foresee happening over the first week and a half within the confines here in Norman?
Well, I mean, and I know it's something you guys have covered because listen to all the content. You know, you guys know I'm not only an owner, I'm a huge supporter of the Sooner Scoop YouTube feed. So, but there is. I love what I'm hearing about Javonte Barnes. Like I don't think people understand how important that could be. And look at Texas. Look at A&M the last few days here with Reuben Owens going out, CJ Baxter. You can't have enough good backs in this league because they are going to get pummeled. You're playing against the best athletes in the country. And I just think if you can have as many good, strong, powerful backs as you can have, you're in great shape. And now the Jaden Gibson news, that's freaking heartbreaking. Like, if that is what we think it is, I mean, I know that hasn't been officially announced, but it just, I mean, Georgia, you know, when you tweeted out the story that night, I put something up, and I know we'd all heard the same. It sounded like he was just primed for a huge year. They were really excited about what was going to happen there. But to kind of end on a happier note, I guess I would say, George, you and I can arm wrestle for Robert Spears Jennings, the president of the fan club. But what the buzz on him and that safety room in general, that trio of safeties, just crazy. Like, just how fast that's gone from, God, I hope Oklahoma doesn't get beat deep, you know, for the third time this quarter, to they have 3 NFL safeties and they've got to figure out who's going to start.
Yeah, I mean, that safety spot, because, you know, I think to start camp, it was Peyton Bowen getting a lot of those first-team reps. Sounds like now Robert Spears Jennings is starting to work his way into that first-team rotation quite a bit, and I think you're going to see him rotate. They're just all three are too good. Like, obviously, Billy Bowman's not going to come off the field, I don't think, a whole lot, but all three are so good that it's going to be really interesting to see how they work into getting all three on the field. And I think it kind of speaks to, again, we've talked a lot about, are they going to run more 3-3-5, which it sounds like they are running some of that in fall camp. So I would assume to get all those guys on the field because you love them so much. And also I think, you know, that defensive line, not to say it's a question mark, I just don't know if they have that difference maker. And so I think if you can put just more playmakers on the field, Brent's going to do that in some fashion. So it's interesting.
It kind of seems like that's the big overall, like, big storyline here through the first week and a half. And it's just been defense, defense, defense. And I know that we've talked about, like, how, I guess, kind of in a way awkward it is to spend so much time talking about the defensive side of the football, particularly at Oklahoma and where this thing has come from. But I mean, it is. And I think that, like, it was something that we talked about on Saturday night in kind of some of the big takeaways from this first week of practice, George. And Josh, I'd love to get your thought on it. Is just like, how good can this thing be? I know that it was something that you were asked of in the mailbag today from subscribers. Like, I don't think that I'm there to the point of this could be a top 5, top 10 defense, but if you want to start talking about top 20, top 15 with what they have on paper going into August 30th in the opener against Temple, it seems like this thing is pretty for real.
Yeah, guys, I actually got to get started with my Fearless 20 this week. My annual predictions where it just kind of, you know, numbers driven, and I'm trying to make as many guesses at what I think is going to happen this year. And I can tell you the ranking of the defense will be one of the 20, like, absolutely will, because I think it's a really interesting point. And I think what Oklahoma fans have got to remember is, if you're talking about total yardage or points allowed and things like that, I don't know that you're talking about a top 10, top 12 defense, because if Oklahoma's offense has the explosion, and it's not going to be the offense we're used to. I'm not saying that, because obviously new quarterback, rebuilt offensive line, there's going to be some hiccups along the way. Like, there just are. But it's still going to be more explosive than a lot of the offenses that play opposite these defenses that we're used to seeing. We talked about it again before in pre-show, talking about Iowa. Iowa gets a big bump defensively because their offense just shreds clock. They just destroy it. Quarters get shorter. There's less snaps. All of these things that help a defense keep numbers and keep offenses under control. Iowa does all of those things. And it's by design, but it's a horrible design. Let's not mistake that. But it is by design. So Oklahoma's not going to do that. They're going to say, hey, we're going to let Jackson Arnold rip it. We're going to try to get Deion Burks down the field. We're going to try to make big plays. So I think if you want to look at it from a, like a Bill Connolly, the SP Plus or FPI or, whatever it is you want to look at it, that looks at it from an analytical perspective, like where they're taking more than just yardage divided by 12 games and saying, okay, that decides who the best defense is. I do think it could be a top 15 group, maybe even sneak into the top 10. But if you're expecting them from a yardage, from a raw data to be in the top 10, I don't think that's realistic just because of A, the schedule that they play, and B, because their offense doesn't allow them to just sit on the ball like that.
Yeah, I mean, I looked into the stats a little bit, Josh, and I mentioned it before we got on here, but, Georgia and Iowa are the only two programs in the last 3 years to finish in the top 10 all 3 seasons in S&P Plus defense. And then outside of that, Alabama did it twice. Kentucky and Texas A&M each did it once. So there's only 4 programs in the SEC that have done that. And so it's going to be really difficult. Last year, OU finished 38th in S&P Plus, and I think they could easily get into the top 25, top 20, maybe even top 15. But to crack that top 10, you're talking about just an elite defense. And not to say that OU won't be really, really good on defense, but they're going to face some really good offenses when you think about Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss. Obviously what Missouri's doing and the talent they have. Texas, I think, is going to have a really good offense this year. Tennessee and Josh Heupel. I mean, you're talking about, Alabama and Jalen Milroe and Kalen DeBoer. Like, that's the thing is I think OU's defense is going to be really good, and it's going to be a strength of this football team. But you also have to consider who they're going up against. And I think also for the people out there that are hearing all these reports about, the defense is dominating in camp and they, dominated the scrimmage the other day, which we talked about a little bit. The offense is also having days in which they're winning. I mean, we heard today that the offense had one of its best practices of fall camp on Monday. So,
they saw your show on Saturday night. They're like, all right, F this guy. Let's go show him.
Exactly. Yeah.
I heard it played through the locker room. That's the rumor.
That's our dream.
You're welcome.
Hello to the Oklahoma locker room.
You're welcome. But that's just fall camp. I want people to know that out there.
It's one of 5 days, or I guess technically 4 days that you practice.
And I should also be clear that if the defense wasn't dominating, that'd be a big red flag for this football team that we've, again, all offseason has said, this defense should be the backbone of this football team, right? When you talk about the experience, the talent, they're in year 3 of the system. Like, let's not forget that OU's learned on offense. They're learning a whole new system. They've got 5 new starters on the offensive line. Jackson Arnold is still technically such a young player, and you've got a handful of wide receivers that are going to start and play for Oklahoma a lot that are not participating in fall camp right now at full go.
I do kind of like the narrative that, and I've seen it out there, and obviously you get what you get on social media, but from other fan bases or even Oklahoma fan base to a certain extent of like, well, Jackson Arnold's he is what he is. It's like, did I miss an entire year or two that he has played football for Oklahoma? He's played 4 quarters.
Yeah,
Pump the brakes.
Let's just wait and see what he does this year.
No doubt. Patience is never something that anybody wants. There's a reason why we don't.
Why would we do that?
Yeah,
why would we wait for anything?
The hot take immediacy. And by saying that, I do want your hot take, Josh, just in terms of what we've heard about the offensive line so far. I know it's come as a big surprise to a lot of people that there might actually be a little bit of a competition at center right now between Josh Bates and the SMU transfer, Branson Hickman.
Guys, I'll be fully honest. That surprises me. I think it says a lot for Josh Bates, because we all know what we were hearing those first few weeks of basically immediately after Troy Everett went down. It was like, oh, this is cataclysmic. This is going to be a real problem. And Bates to have grown the way he did, and it says a lot, guys. Just like what we're just talking about, all the snaps, all the experience, like all that time that he's gotten, he's taken advantage of it, and he's a lot better for it. At the same time, do I really think that when they roll out on the first of that Friday night game, do I think that's going to be anything but Branson Hickman? No, I don't really believe that. Like I don't think that's the way this is going to play. But the fact that they're willing, like even if it's a sales pitch, like even if it's a, okay, Branson Hickman, for whatever reason, they don't think he's quite where he needs to be, whether it's just, getting up to speed with the playbook, whether it's, just whatever, timing with other players, like it could be any of a million things. The fact that Josh Bates is good enough that they can say, hey, there's a real competition going on here. Those players, the rest of the team would know if it's bull. Like they would know if that's just a line that you're feeding them. But clearly Josh Bates is playing good enough football to make that a valid thing that that can be said, that can be repeated. So I think that's a great sign. I'm still worried about the tackle position. I still don't love how that situation plays out. But like George and I have talked about, I think they're going to be pretty good on the interior. Arguably, and I guess more and more, I don't even think it's an argument. I think they will be better on the interior than they were last year. I just think the fall off at tackle could be painful at times, and that's my real concern of where things are right now.
And I think the thing they're wrestling with right now, Josh, is do you value experience or do you value youth and talent, maybe with a guy that isn't as experienced? Like I look at that left tackle, left guard, situation, and it's like Jacob Sexton is probably their best left guard and is playing really good at that position. But, do you play a Heath Ozida there and you bump Sexton out to left tackle where he's probably better than Tarquin, but you can get away and be solid with Tarquin. He has a lot of experience. And so it's like this battle of, do you value Tarquin's experience and stability at left tackle over a guy with like Heath Ozida who hasn't played really any football at this level and his ceiling's probably super high? Like I think that's kind of what they're battling. Same with like Hickman and Bates, where you like Bates' potential. He's a bigger guy. He can probably do some more things, but Hickman's played more football than anybody else on this offensive line. And I get it. It was at SMU, but you know what you're going to get from him down to down. And so you might trust him a little bit more. And I just keep leaning towards what we've seen from Bill in the past, which is he usually doesn't go with the young guy, right? Like he usually goes with the experience, and then maybe partway through the season, it's like, all right, we have to play somebody else, and you just roll the dice with a Heath Ozida or a Josh Bates or whatever it may be. But I think it's good competition. I'm curious to see how it plays out. I still think that the starting offensive line, game 1, August 30th, is going to be Michael Tarquin, Jacob Sexton, Branson Hickman, Fabechi Wiwu, and Jake Taylor. Like I think that is going to be the starting 5. If that's the starting 5 at the end of the season, though, I'll be pretty surprised because I do think that there are some young guys that are going to maybe fight their way into that rotation. Kind of like we saw with Caden Green last year.
Sure.
Eventually got to a point where it's like Caden Green has got to be on the field. I wonder if there's a situation where Heath Ozida is that player this year, or an Eddie Pierre-Louis who's playing really well in fall camp, but like I said, just doesn't have the reps yet.
Right. It's going to be interesting. Got a couple weeks to kind of figure this thing out before August 30th, I guess. Really,
and you can get away with it
before
right?
the first weekend. You got a couple weeks, but
yeah.
September 21 is going to be here before
That's
we
exactly.
know it.
You can get away with that.
James
that
Pierce and
five.
friends are going to be
Exactly.
knocking on the door rather soon.
Exactly. So that's why I wonder if you get to that game and it changes all of a sudden, right?
Yeah.
Or in mid-game it could change.
Sure.
And you're all of a sudden your offensive line looks totally different during conference play.
Should be fun to watch. We'll be back out at practice on Tuesday. Got to talk to Brent Venables on Tuesday as well, and then we'll be right back here in studio talking about everything that Brent talked about. Kind of recapping, the first scrimmage. Hopefully, maybe getting
Some
a little
injuries.
bit of further clarification. Obviously, on Jane Gibson, we know that Gentry Williams was banged up last Friday in the scrimmage. Stuff like that. So get a little bit better idea of where things stand, and then obviously we'll be talking to some players as well after practice Tuesday afternoon. I'll tell you what, this place is starting to get pretty busy with everybody that is, returning back to Norman, moving back into the dorms, all that kind of stuff. I know went down today. So, I don't know. It's starting to feel a lot more like football season, I guess, to a certain extent.
The weather, too.
The weather was perfect over the weekend. We're back into the triple digits here over the next, 30 days.
Yeah.
So, hopefully you took advantage of it over the weekend because it was beautiful around Oklahoma City and Norman. And now we're back into the hell that is August. Sucks.
Yeah, it does suck.
It does suck. It does suck. Are we preparing for any other hurricanes, tropical depressions, anything like that down in Houston?
I really hope not, guys. I have heard no word. Then that's the best news.
Well, that
I
seems
will
like
say,
how
like I
Houston
said,
did it the first time around. There was just no word,
Yeah,
and then they were like,
yeah.
"Oh, here's a hurricane."
Well, I mean, for about 10 days, they're like, oh, Barrel's going to be fine. No big deal. No big deal. And then like 24 hours out, they're like, there might be a problem here. We might have some real concerns. But guys, I will say the trip to Colorado, you go up there and like on like day 3, I'm like, God, it's kind of hot. Like I'm getting kind of warm. I look at my watch. It's like 81 degrees. I'm like, oh God, like I'm gonna die. We get out of the airport in Houston, and it's just like immediately it just hits you. It's foul.
No better welcome home than Houston's really bad. I know when you get onto the tarmac or into the terminal in Oklahoma City, and you step off the plane, and then you feel the heat coming in. It's like, okay, welcome back. This walk over to the car is going to be a lot of fun. All right, Josh, we appreciate it. We will hit you back here on Wednesday, I guess, for the unofficial 40. You make your big return to the podcast, so we look forward to that when we reconvene and speak to you then.
Sounds good, guys. Enjoyed it.
All right, for George, for Josh, I'm Eddie. We'll see you right back here on the Soonerscoop.com channel, YouTube channel. We'll see you next time.